is a little bombshell your therapist dropped in one of your sessions that completely changed your outlook? Story 1. Stop trying to get everyone to agree. When you need everyone to agree, the least agreeable person has all the power. Really changed my outlook on planning family events. Story 2. I've never really had friends. I've had colleagues and classmates and housemates and people who have hung out with me, but I never really felt close to any of them. And I did that thing you see on here sometimes. I stopped reaching out to see if I would be reached out to, and I wasn't, which I took as confirmation that they didn't really want me around, or at the very least, that they wouldn't mind my absence. I was talking to my therapist about people I'd been close to in college, and she told me to pick one and talk about him. So I did. And after I shared some basic stuff like his name and his major, etc., and a couple anecdotes, she asked me what else I knew about him, and I couldn't answer. It wasn't really a broadly applicable bombshell, but she said, "What else?" And I started crying because I realized that for as simple as the question was, my inability to answer spoke volumes. I've never had good friends because I've never been a good friend. I'm withdrawn and reserved, and I always made others do the work to drag me out, without ever extending my own friendship in a meaningful way in return. If I wanted to have meaningful relationships with other people, I would have to build them. I'm still working on this, but I'm trying to make more offers and extend more friendliness to others in my daily life. Edit. Sorry, I know this is late and the thread has probably died already, but I fell asleep shortly after writing this. I'm in Japan, and the time zone is very mismatched. Several comments have asked me what specifically I've changed, and I have two answers. One is to put myself in a position to find people with shared interests. A look at my profile will confirm that I love One Piece and manga in general. While I'm here, I booked a tour to visit the statues of the characters erected in the artist's home prefecture of Kumamoto. The tour was public, and it ended up being 6 people total. We bonded over our shared love of the material, and at the end of the tour, 2 people, a couple, invited me to join them for dinner afterward. It was the first time I felt like I'd been invited to something because the inviter genuinely wanted to spend more time with me. I was elated. We talked for 3 hours about theories, favorite moments, real-world meanings and effects, and all sorts of things. The second is that I'm making an effort to ask more questions. I tend to talk without stopping when I get on a topic I'm passionate about. So when I catch myself doing that, I try to stop myself naturally and ask the other person for their input or segue into a more personal topic. I want to learn more about these people so that I can be a better friend to them. I learned about them outside of their favorite arc or quote, and I'm glad I did. Story 3. How was anger expressed in your household growing up? Were you allowed to show anger? At which point I realized I wasn't allowed to show any negative emotions whatsoever, especially not in reaction to negative emotions from my parents. Story 4. Your mom is never going to be the parent you want or need, so stop expecting her to be and being mad that she isn't. Also, people who are addicts tend to get frozen at the time they started abusing drugs or alcohol because their focus is their addiction and not developing as a person. So a person who started drinking heavily at 13 and quit at 30 would behave a lot like a 13-year-old. Story 5. My counselor said to imagine myself as an orange. Then, consider that not all people like oranges. That doesn't mean that the orange is flawed in any way, not rotten, just that everyone has preferences. That helped ease my insecurities and need for people-pleasing dramatically. Story 6. For context, I had a major TBI, seizures, strokes, and all around not a fun brain time when I was 28. You have to grieve the loss of yourself. Most people wanted me to go back to how I was. The fucked up truth is that part of my brain is dead. The person everyone, including myself, knew died. I needed to grieve the loss of myself. Story 7. Accepting something doesn't mean you have to like it. That took away a lot of my inner conflicts about situations because I could accept a situation without expending energy, internally fighting against the injustice of it. Story 8. I don't want to take meds because I don't want to rely on drugs to feel okay. Don't you already do that? My therapist in the session before I finally saw a psychiatrist and got officially diagnosed with bipolar 2. I was heavily self-medicating at the time, but of course didn't see it that way because it wasn't a prescription. Story 9. Will worrying about it change the outcome? If the answer is yes, go ahead and worry about it. I suddenly realized that I couldn't think of a situation where the answer to that question was ever yes. Really short-circuited the worry cycle for me. Story 10. You always talk about not wanting to do to your daughters what your mom did to you. You worry about it so much in every interaction you have ever had with them. But your children are 19 and 21 now. They are happy and healthy, and they trust you because you've never abused them in any way. So I just want to validate for you that you really have broken that cycle of violence. You did that, and you should be proud of it. I'm proud of you for it. Story 11. At the time, I was into getting tarot card readings and seeing psychics. My therapist told me he has psychic clients who come to him ashamed about the excessive amount of lying they do every day. Haven't been to a psychic or tarot card reader since. Story 12. I was at a high-stress time and I asked her how people live like this. She replied, oftentimes they have cardiac events. She said it as an urging to care for myself as much as possible. Story 13. You are not special. I was having some very strong anxiety at the time, especially in regards to other people. I felt like I was judged everywhere, like I couldn't go to the store, take the bus, or even go to a walk because I felt people were judging my every move. How I dressed, how was my hair, how I talked, even how I walked. Every stranger was thinking bad of me. It was scary as I was telling her about this and how I started avoiding going out, which was a problem because I had to go to college soon. And she looked me straight in the eyes and told me, Name, I'm telling you this with all the care of the world, but you are not special. There is nothing that would make me think twice if we crossed in the street. Is harsh and is exactly what I needed. All the anxiety didn't let me see that until she said it. OFC, she helped me some other ways, but this really changed my life when she said it. I could go to college and be out because of it. Story 14. Is it your anxiety or hers? Drop. Background. I have an overbearing mother who needs to know as much as she can about what I'm doing on my own time to sleep well at night, according to her. She basically treats me like a rebellious kid in a teen movie from the 90s when I'm an independent grown woman approaching my mid-30s. At the time my therapist said this, I was 28-ish and panicking about an upcoming business trip. Not the trip itself, but her reaction to me leaving the state for a few days. As I was going down the list of texts I knew she'd bombard me with, my therapist dropped this. She gave me permission to opt out of managing her fears like I had been doing for years. End result. I went on the trip without telling her a thing and have established a few more sanity-preserving boundaries since. Story 15. You can't control your emotions, but you can control what you do with them. At the time, I was a young adult who had learned zero healthy emotional regulation skills, only suppression and shaming, growing up. So this blew my mind. Story 16. First session, going over history, talking about how sad I am and how it affects my marriage. And after describing our relationship, the counselor said, wow, you're really going through a lot of mental and emotional abuse. WAT? Honestly, I didn't know it was a thing. She was right. It took me a few years, but I was able to get out. Story 17. I used to say a lot of things I wanted to do and then follow up with, but it's hard. My therapist asked me one time how it would feel to say what I wanted to do and then say, and it's hard. I can't believe I hadn't considered that myself in 4 decades, but man, did it change my mindset on certain things. Story 18. There's nothing wrong with you. You are just picking the wrong people to be friends with. I got some new friends and my life changed pretty dramatically after that. Story 19. When you use the words I should, you're silently finishing the sentence with, in order to be worthy of love and respect. Should is a much smaller part of my vocabulary now. Story 20. My therapist traced me on a big piece of paper so I could see how big, small I was. I thought him and I were about the same size. I got him to lay on top of the paper, and I disappeared. Seeing my size that way made my brain begin to think differently. It helped me realize I was not fat. At 5'2" and 110 PDs, I needed to realize that. Years of bullying fucks with one's brain. Story 21. They literally do not give a tea about you, so why do you care about them? Letting me know it was time to move forward from some hurt that I held on to for a long time. And understand vindication and atonement doesn't always come. Story 22. Not related, but thank you OP for asking this question. This has been insightful and the best Reddit post I have ever seen after using this app for 8 years. Thank you. Story 23. It sounds to me like you're trying to convince yourself to stay with your girlfriend. I'm not so sure it should be so difficult. At the time he said this, I remember it was like he said, The earth is flat. I thought he was crazy when he suggested relationships don't need to be difficult. But eventually, I started to realize I was trying to change myself in order to stay with this person, rather than just being who I am. It took me 3 more months to finally break up with her. But from that day on, I vowed to never again abandon myself just to be with someone I had convinced myself was better than me. Story 24. I was struggling with my alcoholism, and we were discussing how I had been cutting back. She asked what I would consider success with regard to my drinking. I said I wanted to get to a point where it wasn't interfering with my daily life. I wanted to just be able to have a glass of wine at holiday dinners or family gatherings. She simply asked me why. Why was it important for me to drink at those times? It was as if she'd turned on a light. Alcohol had always been a key ingredient in every family function for my entire life. When I smell bourbon, I think of my uncle. When I smell vermouth, I think of my dad. Alcohol ran through almost every happy childhood memory, but, even more than that, I was very afraid of the explanation I'd have to give when family and friends asked why I wasn't having a drink. I had tried to quit before but failed. What if I admitted my problem, only to fall off the wagon? When she asked why I didn't want to completely quit, it was the first time I saw that last part of big picture. I'd be willing to drink myself to death in order to avoid being scrutinized or judged for possible future failures. That was the day I quit. I've been sober since May 6th, 2017, 407 days. Story 25. I'll go first. My therapist suggested being an outsider in my family was a good thing, because they're all narcissists. So I'm normal. So why do I care what they think if they're so broken? Story 26. Wow. I was talking about my mother's behavior through my life and my upbringing in general. I often use it as a joke that I made my therapist say this. However, she followed it up by telling me that, considering all that had happened and the stuff I had been through, I was doing really well in life. I shouldn't be so hard on myself and needed to focus more on my positive achievements rather than letting my remaining flaws hold my focus. It's a moment I keep coming back to. It was also very cathartic to have a professional pretty much agree that my past life was nuts. Story 27. Why do you think you're lazy? Then she listed off all the things she knows I'm doing for my family, my job, and my life. It kind of blew my mind when I struggled to come up with an example. She also described family dysfunction as water. Some families are messed up in a way that everyone can see the huge waves across the surface. Others are better at hiding it, but there's still a riptide that you can't see unless you're also in the water. Made me realize that trying to keep the surface from ever rippling doesn't erase what is happening underneath. Story 28. I was constantly bringing up how I felt like a completely different person after my mom died. Like there was a marked difference between before and after her death. But once she was asking about my hobbies, I got really into describing all the things I loved to do, or at least used to do, before I got into a deep depression. She was like, "Wow, you seem very passionate." And I just sat there like, well, I mean, I can't change what I like to do. They're still fun to do. And it's like she knew when to take a step back because it was like, wow, I may be super depressed about my mom passing, but I'm still me. I'm still my passions, and those don't go away. IDK, maybe it only makes sense to be, but it really started getting me back on track. Story 29. I don't work as a therapist. I'm an ESL, English as a Second Language teacher in Japan. But my classes are one-on-one, so I do spend a lot of time on consultation and personal conversations. Something I said to a client once seemed to really change his outlook. A lot of my company's clients are focused on learning English for international business. And this man, as many of them are, was concerned about making mistakes and looking like a fool. I asked him if the English speakers he works with sometimes try to speak Japanese, and he said that they do. I asked him if they ever make mistakes, and he said that they do. I asked him to name one, and he couldn't. And I told him that his mistakes will be forgotten too. Story 30. Once in college, I was talking about a friend of mine, and the therapist asked me if I thought he would live to adulthood. It completely took me aback. Iris did not. Story 31. You may just be graduating high school and you're going to be a legal adult, but you're just a kid. It's not your responsibility to take care of everyone. It was never your responsibility, because at the end of the day, you were just a kid wondering why you had to be the marriage counselor and shielding your brother from everything. I didn't know how much I needed to be reminded how I was a kid until that moment. It made sense, though, on why I often feel like time went by too fast, and I didn't get to enjoy being a teen in high school, because I was too busy being an adult when it was never my responsibility. Story 32. He helped me understand grief in others better. That it was my own anxiety that made me want to fix and improve things for them. Instead, I should just follow them on that ride and listen. Story 33. I have a few. If one of your loved ones had this problem, what would you tell them? Boom. Self-compassion unlocked. Another one is regarding buried traumatic memories. If you buried some in the yard, then later thought, oh, I wonder what that was, and dig it up, all you're going to find is some. Edit. I remembered another great one. Don't wait until you feel like yourself again so you can enjoy the things you used to enjoy. Do the things you used to enjoy until you feel like yourself again. Edit. Another one. I've been to a lot of therapy. No parent does a perfect job, so no parent does a complete job. Every adult needs to finish the job of parenting themselves. Story 34. Mine was about my relationship with my mother. He kept asking questions until I remember saying, well, I just stopped telling her anything about trusting her. My shoulders were instantly lighter. Story 35. I was having non-stop panic attacks and derealization that lasted a month. It was like my brain was stuck in panic mode. I decided to find a therapist. In our first session, she said, you know you don't have to suffer, right? Meaning I should schedule an appointment with a psychiatrist and get on medication. I scheduled one ASAP, and it truly saved my life. I don't know what I had been waiting for or delaying. Edit. I told my therapist I was used to pushing through depressive episodes and was hoping this would go away on its own as well. She pointed out that I could barely function or communicate with the way I was presenting myself, and that in order to get any benefit from therapy, that I needed to physically regulate myself first. Story 36. After I beat up my middle school bully, my therapist congratulated me for standing up for myself. I thought she would chastise me like every other adult in my life, but she was encouraging. Obviously, she told me that violence like that wasn't the best way to handle it, but that making a stand was important either way. No one had ever told me that it was okay. I always got a lecture about not acknowledging bullies and telling the teacher instead, but we all know that never works. Having an adult validate me, even if I wasn't entirely right, was a huge boost. Story 37. I wanted to reach out to my ex. My therapist said, you're feeling a loss of security because your family is moving away from your city. Don't reach out. So insightful. I didn't reach out and I'm better for it. Story 38. That being selfish is okay, but being self-centered isn't. Being selfish is recognizing your needs and taking care of yourself, but being self-centered is ignoring everyone else. Oh, another one that a commenter reminded me about. Most men only know two emotions, happy and angry, because we're told that's all we can feel. That sometimes your body and mind are reacting with anger, but that's not what you're feeling. In those moments, you need to take a break and ask what emotion you're feeling. I still struggle with this one. Story 39. I don't have anything to add besides, this is an excellent topic, and thank you all for sharing. I gained a little bit of secondhand wisdom from y'all and I needed it today. Story 40. At the end of my first therapy session, do you realize you've said the word sorry 30 times in 50 minutes? And that's the day I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Story 41. I had been getting tans, my nails done, and shopping regularly, and I told my therapist that it felt really good. But it's weird because I've never been high maintenance. He said, you've always been high maintenance. You've just never been in a healthy enough position to maintain yourself. Kinda crushed me and completely changed my perspective of myself. Story 42. When you let him break your boundaries over and over again, it wasn't him breaking your boundaries anymore. It was you breaking your boundaries. Hit me right in the gut, but my therapist was right. Story 43. You have the most profound history of trauma I've worked with in my entire career. My lifelong feelings of self-doubt, being dramatic or overreacting or misremembering and downplaying abuse just melted. My brain attempted to comprehend the severity of my PTSD for the first time rather than just making another joke about it. I was called out on a level of denial that was so deeply a part of me I didn't know who I was without it. Story 44. I told her I think I'm just a weak person. She drew a timeline of the last year on a whiteboard and asked me what significant things had happened. I had 7 unrelated traumatic events unfold in that year, 2019, and I just stared at it. She told me most people only go through 1 to 3 traumatic events of that magnitude in their whole lifetime, and I cried. I didn't look at it and think, Wow, life sucks for me. I looked at it and was amazed at my strength. Life kept throwing horrors at me. And yet there I was sitting in therapy still fighting. I still doubt my strengths, but whenever I remember that moment, I realize I am made of steel. Story 45. I've never seen two people more completely wrong for each other, and if you don't get out of this marriage, you'll be dead of a heart attack within a year. It was the permission I needed after taking Till Death Do Us Part. 25 years ago, very seriously. Our marriage counselor's words 11 years ago. Story 46. You can't have true emotional vulnerability with others until you can learn to have emotional vulnerability with yourself. I'm having some issues connecting with people in my life, but really it's because I deny and shove down my own emotions so effectively that I don't even know myself. Story 47. That I'm emotionally closed off to almost everyone in my life with the exception of my children and sister. But why wouldn't I be, considering how I was raised? However, what used to be protective has become maladaptive. Blew my mind and opened new doors. Story 48. I was finishing a session and putting my coat on to leave when my therapist asked me, "Why do you always fall for unavailable women?" I instantly replied, "I don't feel like I actually deserve anyone. So by falling for unavailable women, it allows me to tell myself that I tried, even though I know that I'm setting myself up to fail." I don't know who was more stunned at my answer, her or me. A few years later, and I find myself 2 years deep into my first ever healthy relationship, hers too, and engaged. My problem was in how I felt about myself, not my actual worthiness to other people. Coincidentally, at the beginning of our relationship, my future wife felt like she didn't deserve me, and we spent the first 6 months working on that. Part of the joy of growing up as lesbians in small town nowhere and being rejected by most people around us. Story 49. She asked how I viewed men, and I said untrustworthy and protectors. And she goes, "So men should protect you, but you don't trust them." Blew my mind. Story 50. When I started to realize I was transgender, I was really afraid of taking hormones. A lot of people had tried to scare me into not medically transitioning, claiming it was dangerous or would ruin my body. My therapist asked me to make a pros and cons list about taking hormones, and also do the pros and cons of not taking hormones, because not medically transitioning is also a choice that will affect you. It helped me realize that all the things I was afraid of were fear-mongering and not actual side effects. I started HRT a few months later, and it literally saved my life. Story 51. Companion. Not lover, not partner, not friend, etc., a companion. Turns out I am not as resilient as I and everyone thought I was, and that apparently even unbeknownst to me, I took the loss of my 2 cats during the pandemic harder than I could realize. Unexplainable, heavy bouts of depression out of nowhere that I couldn't pull myself out. She mentioned that one word and it all snaps together and makes sense. Cat-sitting a friend's cat now till she relocates to a place that can house it. Then I'm going cat and puppy adopting, so they can be friends. Story 52. Were you ever allowed to feel your feelings? Nope. Turns out my mom is a master gaslighter. Mom, I'm sad. No, you're not. You're just tired. Mom, this makes me really happy. No, it doesn't. You are just overstimulated. Mom, I feel bad when you treat me like this. No, you don't. You just have been manipulated by your friends to rebel. I was never allowed to express, understand, feel my feelings without my mom telling me what I really felt and why. As an adult, I had to undo all her programming and relearn how to identify my feelings after my psychiatrist pointed out my lack of understanding. Story 53. My partner at the time was abusive, but I told her I didn't want to break up my family. She said, "It's already broken." Hated her for saying that, but she was right. Story 54. Probably the best one is that maintaining a relationship with certain people would be a service project. That I could do it if I wanted, but with the knowledge that it would be work, and I wouldn't be able to expect reciprocity. And not to take on too many service projects. Story 55. He put down his pencil in the middle of one of my stories and exhaled. He said, "That is a lot." I told the same story a few times matter-of-factly, and never considered how bad it was. Story 56. When they mentioned that they felt I was a clear example of CPTSD, I instantly felt ashamed because that's what people get after going to war. No way I could have that. You experienced battles every day of your life, and you have seen extreme violence on the regular. It may not be a countrywide war, but you experienced your own wars. I was like, well, God, it keeps me going, knowing I don't deal with those wars anymore. Story 57. Wow, your mother is really a terrible person. My younger siblings have come to this conclusion a long time ago without therapy. But for some reason, with me being the oldest, I can't hate her, although I have valid reasons to. She neglected my sister and I and basically forced me to raise two small children starting at age 8 because she wasn't physically or emotionally available to do so. She is now a full-blown narcissist alcoholic, and I look back and see how she was emotionally manipulative and abusive. So my therapist is right in her conclusion. I just never could see her that way because she was my mom at the end of the day. Story 58. A good mother takes care of herself. If you don't take care of yourself, you can't fully care for your children. I was on a high stress level because of all the appointments my son has and the constant need to be there for him. Possible autism. Since that therapy session, I try to find at least 1 hour for myself, and it works wonders. Story 59. Studies have shown that expecting the worst doesn't make disappointment any less painful, so you might as well expect the best and live with hope. Edit to add, this advice was monumentally helpful as I navigated multiple pregnancy losses and rounds of IVF. It's so easy to put hope on the shelf when you're in that world, but you need some hope to keep going. This comment gave me permission to imagine and talk about my future child. I think it's the only reason I stick it out, and now I'm nursing my perfect son. Story 60. It seems like you have some kind of block in your brain, or something to that effect. I constantly struggled with motivation and accomplishing things, and regularly felt like I was paralyzed or stuck because my brain wasn't listening to me. It was amazing hearing someone put what I had been feeling into words, and acknowledging that there was an issue beyond me needing to try harder. Of course, I later found out that the block was in fact a symptom of ADHD, and it almost completely disappeared when I started ADHD meds a few years later. Story 61. After a 3-year battle with Alzheimer's and having weird meth smoker move into her garage to help her and my disabled sister while I was in and out of hospitals with my 4-year-old daughter having multiple brain surgeries, burying my mom, closing her estate while having to then move my 3 kids and 2 cats to another city and sell my old home and buy a new home. And I thought, Jesus fucking Christ, will this absolute madness ever end? And I was so stressed, trauma brain, so sad at how my mom was being abused by my sister and the meth and I was barely holding on to my sanity. I sat my therapist telling her all this crazy bullshit sandwich I had to eat while trying to be fully there for my daughter, and how I lived 50 miles away from my mom but visited weekly to make sure she was okay. I said, I'm so filled with so much bitterness I can't even leave my house. I feel stuck in this place. It was a whole year in my new town, my new house, and I was stuck in the past. She said, bitterness is sadness plus anger. Break those down, and it's easier to forgive yourself for all that you're angry about and allow yourself to grieve. That helped me so much, and EMDR therapy. Story 62. This is what suffering looks like. I am disabled and chronically ill and fighting every day to stay here. But people constantly need me to pretend to be upbeat and optimistic about it. When my therapist told me she saw me suffering, I broke down and acknowledged that I am fucking miserable at times. And that goes unnoticed. She went on to tell me to acknowledge its presence for myself, and whoa, is it ever better than that toxic positivity my friends and family keep looking for? I feel better. Story 63. You can't expect everyone to get it when you have been doing it for 25 years and they have been doing it for a month. Expect less from them. It's so obvious, but for me, I just could not see it. Story 64. He was a good dad but a bad husband, but he wasn't your husband. It wasn't your job to fix that marriage. Parents hated each other, broke up. Always besties with my dad, but was mostly raised by mum due to financial difficulties. Love mum too, so was pulled between them. Spent my entire childhood hearing how he was, when to me he was always open and loving with my issues without judgment. My counselor said this to me, and it changed my whole worldview. It wasn't, and never will be, my job to have fixed that show of a marriage. He was a good dad, and that's all that mattered. Story 65. Okay, I just asked you a pretty easy question and you went on a tangent trying to find your way to the answer. Next time, let's try to focus on just answering directly so I can follow up. Changed my outlook on her role as my therapist. That was the last time I talked to her. Story 66. She smacked her notes down on the table, asking me who told me it was okay to speak about myself in such a manner. She followed it up with explaining that self-hate is a habit, and habits can be broken. I had no idea just how much I referred to myself in negative ways until then, how much of my coping was hating on myself. Story 67. If you had achieved all the things you wish you had, you would be dead by now. It made me cold stop and really think about my own limitations versus the unreasonable expectations upon me. Most people in my family have master's or double bachelor's degrees. It also validated and made me appreciate all the things that I had pushed through too. At this point, I was heavily suicidal, but after that and several months to process, I'm completely off antidepressants and don't need them anymore. Story 68. You're a perfectionist, and no one is perfect. It's unreasonable for you and others to expect perfect from you. Completely disagreed in session and spent the remaining time arguing how I literally didn't care about things. That I basically lived a don't try, can't fail attitude. Bus journey home, a bit of reflection, mind blown. Story 69. Let them. So my therapist didn't tell me this, but Mel Robbins talks about the let them theory, and it changed my life. People are gossiping about you? Let them. Your boyfriend wants to break up? Let them. Your friend doesn't heed your advice that you think is best? Let them. People don't agree with you? Let them. I struggled with trying to be the fixer friend, giving friend, wanting everyone to like me friend, and it stems from being a controlling person in different aspects. It's something I've been actively working on for the last 4 years. This theory changed my life. I don't need to control everyone around me, their perspective of me, their life choices, opinions that don't match mine, and clinging on to relationships that didn't want to be with me or shouldn't even be in my life to begin with. I've seen such a change in my mindset, and I honestly feel like it has relieved so much stress and anxiety from my life already. I'm still working on it, and slip up still. But I tell myself, let them, and I move on to what's in front of me. Story 70. My abnormal psychology professor at Ohio State told us once in lecture that he usually starts by asking his patients, do you ever feel that there is a battle between good and evil going on inside your mind? I thought to myself, yes, exactly. Then he told us that if the patient replied yes, that he knew something was very wrong. Story 71. Try leaning into the discomfort and fear instead of avoiding it. That's how you either learn to live with it or work through it. She was right. Things got so much better when I faced and accepted the things I was disappointed in and afraid of. Story 72. 1. Who told you? Today I learned that assumptions are usually the opposite of truth. I assume my mom would have been upset with me for declining her call when I am not in the mental space to talk. I assume my mom is not interested in talking with me about what's important to me based on her actions and words. Well, who told you? My therapist asked. Has your mom ever told you she's not interested in what you're talking about? Oof. She challenged me to go forth in the week and ask myself, who told me? About assumptions I have about people. 2. Halt. Never have important or emotionally charged conversations if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Furthermore, if you're reacting to something more strongly than you normally would have, are you halt? Story 73. It wasn't my therapist. It was my girlfriend's dad I was talking with over a pint. But he was a therapist as his profession. I was complaining about my father, about how he was narcissistic and could never be wrong, how he mentally abused my mother, was financially restrictive, absent in so many ways. He did work hard, I'll give him that, and so on. How I didn't want a relationship with him, and how I feel like I learned nothing from him, except that if I ever had children, I'd do the exact opposite of many of the things he did. He turned to me and said, so basically, he taught you how to be a good father, and it stopped me in my tracks. Just that perception shift was enough for me to just let go of the neglect and grief over having never had the father I wanted.